Hey guys, so today we're going to be testing the cheapest gaming computer that I could find on Best Buy's website. It happened to be this HP Victus that I have right here. It was on sale for $530. I'll talk about the specs, I'll run some benchmarks, I'll do some gaming just so you guys can see what to expect when you go with something like this. A lot of times budget pre-builds aren't easily upgradable. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to let you know what's the most you can upgrade this system. Then I'll run the benchmarks again and do some gaming to see how much of an improvement we get when we upgrade this system. It's not going to be easy. It's a lot of proprietary parts. So let's see if we can bypass all that crap. We're going to be pushing this thing to the limits to see how much we can upgrade this system. Hopefully I don't start a fire, but it's going to be pretty sicko mode. It came in this HP box that most HP desktops come in. They just put a V on it, which stands for very cool. I was actually still working at Best Buy whenever the Victus line started to come out. It was like a budget omen. They weren't anything special. They just put V's on them to make them look cool. This is what you're gonna get for $530. You're gonna get an i3-12100F, 8 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM, a 512 gig NVMe SSD. You get Wi-Fi 6. It'll come with a GTX 1650 with 4 gigs of video RAM, and it comes with a 350 watt power supply. And that's where it kind of shoots itself in the foot. What's included in the box is mouse, keyboard, power cable, manuals, that's it. If you try to build this computer on PC Part Picker, you can actually build it slightly cheaper if you go for some of the cheapest parts. I mean, they're not putting premium parts in here. Now, you don't get a genuine copy of Windows 11. Yeah, if you know how to get Windows 11 and you don't need to buy it, it ends up being a little cheaper. Upgrade options are a little better because you're not buying proprietary parts. I'm going to see if it's even worth buying a really cheap computer and trying to upgrade it later, or if it makes sense to just spend a little more, pick your parts, build it yourself. I don't know if you've seen the inside of these. It's not pretty. Right now with the 1650, as far as the recommended power supplies go for that card, it's already maxed out. It says you need about a 350 to 400 watt power supply to power a 1650. You can't easily swap out this PSU because it has this proprietary cable connecting it to the motherboard.
That cable is
which is required for it to power on. I tried powering it on with it unplugged and it doesn't turn on. So it's some CMD cable that only the HP power supplies come with. So I'm gonna see what I can do to get around that. It may not look pretty, but I'm gonna try to do it anyway. So if you're just looking at the computer right now, I mean, it has a clean, slick design, nothing special. It has a V, like I said, the V stands for very good. Just kidding, it stands for Victus. It can also stand for Vitron. All my friends call me Vitron. Comes with a cool little decal, it says 15L. Maybe the designers took 15 L's while trying to design this computer. Not sure, probably stands for 15 liters. And then on this side it says Victus. You cannot switch out the motherboard because the back of the case is only cut out for this specific motherboard. Very basic stuff, doesn't look pretty. 80mm fan in the back. The way it's spec'd right now, you don't need very much cooling because it's an i3, low wattage processor. 1650 doesn't really heat up much. Looking inside it looks pretty ugly. You get a basic cooler over the processor, 1 stick of RAM, green motherboard, which looks really not nice. It does have a slot to put a 3.5-inch drive so that you can have more storage, which I guess is cool, but I'm gonna take it out. I'm not gonna be using that. Now, if you're looking at the ports in the front, you get a headphone jack, you get 4 USB 3.0s, and then you get a USB Type-C in the front. So nice that it has a decent amount of USBs. Cooling may be an issue if we upgrade the processor. So the socket type is LGA 1700. I have a 12600K or a 13600K I can throw in there. I don't want to throw something in that uses a lot of power. Now, both those processors use a decent amount of power. Would be better if you had like a 13400F, even a 12400F, but I'll probably throw in the 12600K. We'll see what happens. Now, the PSU does come with an 8-pin PCIe connector, but it's not as easy as, oh, my GPU has an 8-pin connector, I'm fine, I can throw it in there. That's not the case. I have cards that only use 8 pins, but they definitely require more power than 350 watts. So if you want a system that's stable, that's not gonna keep shutting off on you because it's drawing too much power, you cannot simply just throw in a GPU and expect it to be powered. Possibly even risk damaging the unit. So it's definitely not a good idea to just throw in a GPU with that crappy of a power supply. With that being said, I'm going to try to throw a 3070 Founders Edition in there. I'm gonna see how I can power it safely and efficiently. Let's go ahead and see what the flip I can do. So this drink says it gives you epic focus. I don't know if the camera can focus on it, but it's gonna help me focus. This is the 1650. I don't think it even weighs 8 ounces. I feel like if I just throw it up, it'll just float up. It's like, oh no. Since it's a cheap pre-build, we're gonna have to break one of these. Let's just go ahead and do it, I guess. Well, don't need that anymore. This motherboard does not support other coolers, so that's why we gotta stick with this one. I need to take better care of these. These are getting all scratched. But we're gonna upgrade this build with some Royal RAM, 3200 megahertz of DDR4 RAM. It should look sick. I did 3 upgrades. I upgraded the processor from an i3-12100F to an i5-12600K. Then I swapped out this 1650 for a 3070. Then I upgraded the RAM to G-Skill Royal RAM, 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 megahertz RAM. Hopefully I was able to bypass the power issue. I will show you what I did afterwards. I just want to see if this works. It's booting and I'm getting video. Okay, yeah, it's not detecting my GPU. Let's reinstall some drivers really quick. Computer did blue screen once. It restarted. Seems to be stable now. It is powering. I installed drivers for the 3070. It is reading that a 3070 is in there. I'm a little nervous for some reason. Anytime I do things that I probably shouldn't do, it just makes me a little nervous. I just don't want to damage any components or start a fire or get electrocuted. But we're doing this in the name of science.
Because I only believe in science.
So I did run the user benchmark test. The 1650 was abysmal. So I got 44% in gaming, 99% in desktop, 39% workstation versus 167 in gaming for the 3070, 112 for desktop, and 168% in workstation. Big performance increase there, despite the bottleneck. We're gonna run Cinebench. We'll compare how we scored with the i3 and we'll see what we get now. There was pretty much no point in putting the 12600K. Well, I shouldn't say no point. It's just the 12600K is limited to 65 watts of power. K in here because it is limited to 65 watts, which is partly due because of the motherboard setup and the lack of power the PSU can supply to it. My i5 12600K is pretty much castrated. So it's limited to 65 watts of power. When it's in its max turbo frequency, I'm usually pushing 150 watts. It did score better than the 12100F, even though its power was limited. So you're looking at 11,881 versus 7,195. A decent improvement there. It's expected to see a big jump, but usually when I run the Cinebench with my 12600K, I'm getting 17,000 to 18,000. Did see an improvement, just not the improvement I wanted to see. I'm running the 3D Mark benchmark test right now. We'll see what results I get. I ran into another issue. Even though my RAM is 3200 megahertz, there's no way to change the RAM speed to 3200 megahertz. It defaults to 2133 megahertz. I was reading up, it says that the only module that will run at 3200 megahertz is the stick it came with, because you cannot change the XMP profile in the BIOS. There's just no option. It's starting to look like this cheap computer is not really worth it so far. That's kind of what you get when you cheap out. You get cheap results. You get problems. When you cheap out, you get problems. I did run Firestrike Extreme and Time Spy. Obviously a 3070 should just obliterate a 1650. We're just trying to see how much we can upgrade this Victus. One reason why I went with the 3070 is because that's probably my most powerful card that fits in this case. The 3080 wouldn't fit. My 4080 for sure as hell wouldn't fit. Yeah. That's why. So when you compare Time Spy, with the 3070 I got 12,771 versus 3,549 on the 1650 with the i3. When you compare the graphics test 1, I had a 300% increase in FPS. On the graphics test 2, I got a almost 285% more FPS. What's interesting on the CPU test, I almost got 100% FPS better. So even though my 12600K is very limited due to the power, I am still kicking that 12100's butt. When we move on to Firestark Extreme, I got 15,525 on the 3070 versus 3,951 on the 1650. Crazy increase, 283% in the first graphics test, 319% on the second when it comes to FPS. So yeah, this thing is a beast when you compare it to how it used to perform. Even though the power is low, even though the RAM can't run at the max speed, it's still not bad so far. Now, when you compare it to the Shadow of the Tomb Raider test, I actually didn't even bother running the test in 1440p when it was stock, just because I was only getting 45 FPS at 1080p at the highest settings. So it's not even gonna be worth it if you do 1440p. These are the results I got. I got 45 FPS, total of 7,027 frames rendered when it came to the 1650. The 3070, I got 146 average FPS, a total of 23,010 frames rendered. Dramatic improvement there. The processor definitely helps when it comes to Tomb Raider. As I've said in my past videos, Shadow of the Tomb Raider does rely on the CPU a lot. So yeah, it's good to see that there's an improvement there. Now with the Cyberpunk benchmark test, I also did 1080p. That thing stock was not able to run 1440p, or at least it's not playable at 1440p. It basically wasn't playable at 1080p. So obviously ray tracing was off. The 1650 does not support ray tracing. When you compare the scores, the 1650 got 30.84 frames per second average with a total of 1,980 frames rendered. Now with the 3070, I got 109.51 frames per second average with a total of 7,036 frames rendered. It's a nice jump. It now makes Cyberpunk playable because at 30 frames per second average is really choppy. When I was watching it, it was hurting my eyes. It was just not good. All right, so I did game with GTA 5. So when I was gaming with the 1650 and the i3, my FPS was hovering in the 30 to 40 range. It was playable, but honestly, it wasn't really what you want. It was okay, you know. This isn't how I like to play GTA 5. I'd rather be closer to at least 60 frames per second, but it struggled to even hit 40 frames per second. Now, when you're playing with the 3070 and the i5 12600K, my FPS was over 100 FPS most of the time. It was definitely a more enjoyable experience. Yeah, just the overall experience was just a really great experience. It was smooth gameplay. It looked pretty sicko mode. So games are pretty much night and day difference. So let's recap. I upgraded the video card from a 1650 to a 3070. So double the video RAM, 4 gigs to 8 gigs. I doubled the RAM from 8 gigs to 16 gigs. I swapped out the 12100F with an i5 12600K. You may ask, how did I power a 3070 with only 350 watt power supply? Well, I kind of cheated. There's no way in hell that a 350 watt power supply is going to efficiently power a 3070 Founders Edition. I had to use an external power supply, so I'm using a Cooler Master 850 watt SFX power supply. I used a SATA 24 pin adapter where you connect the external power supply as well as a SATA power connector so that when you turn the computer on, it tells the power supply to kick on as well to power your GPU. So that's how I've been able to get video, and that's how I've been able to power the 3070. I managed to increase the performance dramatically with these upgrades. Now, it kind of comes down to, is it worth it? Should you buy a pre-build like this with very limited upgrade capability? And I wouldn't even call this upgrading. Like, I have to have the case open, which helps with heat because there isn't a lot of fans. There's only 2 fans in this case, if you include the CPU fan. And my power supply does not fit in the case, so it's just hanging out there. So realistically, it's not an ideal upgrade. I guess if you just have it sitting there and you never touch it, sure, you can do it the way I did it, but I don't recommend you doing this. I don't recommend this actually being your gaming setup. This computer is really designed to be an entry-level gaming PC. It will not allow you to game past 1080p resolution. Don't expect to get more than 60 FPS in really any game. Online games, Fortnite, you're wanting to do PUBG, or just have an office computer. That's what this is designed to do. It's not designed for the person who wants to get into gaming and wants to upgrade later. It seems like a good deal because it's a gaming computer for $529. If you use PC Part Picker, you can build a better system with better upgrade capability for around the same price, minus getting an active license for Windows 11. But there's always a way to get it. It would be way better to go that route than to just buy this and have to have an external power supply powering your GPU, and then the motherboard bottlenecks any processor that you try to upgrade to. And also your RAM is bottlenecked because your motherboard doesn't support that speed unless it's the stock RAM stick that it came with. The only real upgrades you can do, you can throw in another 8 gig stick and you can put in a 3.5-inch hard drive. Now there is an 8-pin connector that's on the power supply. The thing is, this computer is pretty much maxed out for power. With a 350 watt power supply, you can't really get a better GPU because they all require more power. The cool thing about this though, is that you can actually change the color of the V at times. To be honest, in my opinion, I would not call this a gaming computer. I would just call it a home desktop computer. Seems like a good deal. I don't think it's worth it. I will put a PC Part Picker list that I would recommend you build over this because, like I said, upgrading is a nightmare and you're gonna spend an arm and a leg trying to upgrade it. So if you add it up, 3070's 500 bucks, the power supply was 140 bucks, the 12600K is what, 250, 270 bucks. Once you add all that up, at that point, might as well have either bought all the parts and built it yourself or buy a pre-build that actually has real PC components, not proprietary motherboards, cases that don't allow you to really do anything. This would be a good computer for my grandparents. If you call yourself a gamer and you're wanting the game and you're looking to buy something built already, stay away. That was pretty sicko mode. If you have any video ideas that you'd like to see, leave it in the comments below. This was fun. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Say bye, Klaus.